Welcome back to our coverage on the Synod on Synodality in Rome. We are joined now by Bishop Daniel Flores of the Diocese of Brownsville in Texas. He is one of the U.S. delegates at the Synod on Synodality and was just elected as a new member of the Ordinary Council of the General Secretariat of the Synod. Your Excellency, thank you so much for being here with us and taking the time, what I know is a busy final week of the Synod. So this new appointment I just mentioned, can you explain what this new role is and what it means moving forward?
Well, in brief, because I only understand in brief, I think I will be oriented more probably before this week is out as to what it will require. It's basically the bishop advisors to the Holy Father for the time between synods as we move forward in drawing together what the synod has resulted in over time, and then his advisors with regard to any future synod that he may plan. So those are all things that the Holy Father ultimately decides, but it's a group from around the world, the different continents, to advise the Holy Father on those matters. Yeah.
You know, as we're wrapping up, and I know that the drafters are working on the amendments that the delegates will vote on Saturday, one of the things that we've been noticing just over the course of the week is really the stark difference between expectations of different sides for what the Synod would accomplish and what it is. And it seems that the Holy Father has definitively, and that as we've gone through this process now, has come to articulate what synodality actually is. And it's not necessarily structural or, organization, technocracy, democratic reform, but it does seem like there might be some people disappointed that that's not what's happening.
Right. I mean, there were many different kinds of expectations, and there have been a lot of sort of like different takes as to kind of what the synod is about and what maybe people thought it really is about as opposed to what it's being said. And so there's a lot of that kind of floating around the world in different ways. So yes, the Holy Father, I think, has been very sort of centered from the very beginning that at the heart of this is a conversion to a sense of the style and the manner of Jesus in the way he dealt with us. The Word became flesh and had a certain way of insinuating his grace into the lives of the people whom he encountered, and that's something that we need to kind of appreciate, but also find a way to put into practice in the current context of the world, which is very complex, which is why the global synod is so important, because it's not just what one part of the world thinks is like the major issue. It's a worldwide thing, and so part of the sort of the brunt of sort of the effort of these gatherings in Rome is really to kind of help the global church hear each other in terms of the kinds of challenges. What are the challenges of living the faith and of teaching the faith and of evangelizing in the many different contexts of a very complex world? But at the heart of it, I think the Pope has called us to a kind of a spirituality that without conversion, without sort of a renewal of the heart of Christ, then we will just be spinning our wheels.
I imagine when you go home to Texas, there's a lot of local faithful who are asking you for even more clarity of what are these meetings happening here at the Vatican. For viewers who are still unclear again, and you gave a great definition there on synodality, how would you explain to the local faithful how this will impact the church in their diocese?
Right. Well, one of the things I would say, well, like, for example, the document that's being worked on, I think it'll be an important document, but the Holy Father has said, and I've said to my own diocese, the synodal sort of perspective that the Holy Father is promoting in the life of the church is not primarily about documents produced. It's primarily about marking how it is that at our local churches, we are more attentive to kind of the way the church evangelizes and cares for our local community, because the church lives her life in the local Eucharist and it's in communion with the whole. But there's a way, especially of manifesting a certain compassion, and certainly at the heart of it is a way to kind of hear what people are saying. It's a kind of Thomist realism, I would call it. You can't evangelize in the world if you don't have a sense as to what people are really facing, and that's what I think is people will have different expectations, but unless we listen, we're not going to know how to speak Christ.
I appreciate that so very much. You know, last month I was with EWTN and we were at the International Eucharistic Congress in Ecuador in Quito. And of course, synodality was spoken of, but it was in directly this sense, which is not anything new. It's a recovery, I think, of something even Pope Pius XII taught in Mediator Dei, that our relationship is not just me and Christ, but through Christ to also be with each other and to evangelize the world. And today's encyclical, De Lexit Nos, we're still reading through it, but it seems that this is articulating what Pope Francis wants to happen too, through the devotion of the Sacred Heart.
I do think there's a sense that I think needs to come more and more to the fore, that the language of synodality is not principally meant to name something that is brand new in the church. It may be something as a style that has a word that we're attaching to it now, but we're living in an age that is increasingly sort of personalized religion, personalized politics. I have decided this is what I think, and the rest of the world is sort of like judged based on whether or not it agrees with me. And this is antithetical to the way St. Paul writes his letters, is the way the Gospels are written, or is the way the early church sort of acted. And so this sense, for example, you mentioned the Sacred Heart, but I remember also that last October at just a little bit before this time, the Holy Father had issued that document on Saint Therese of Lisieux, because the spirituality of closeness to the heart of Jesus is always a spirituality that is open to the service and compassion for the ones around us. You cannot live a Catholic life that is shut off from that. And the attempt in this world, which is so deeply divided into kind of a kind of radical individualism, the gospel has to announce this sense that we cannot journey to God in fidelity to Christ if we aren't trying to go together. And that's the heart of what it is to be a Catholic. We are joined at the hip, whether we like it or not, and so we might as well learn how to love it, right?
Well, I'm happy you mentioned this call to conversion and this tendency that we all can have in the modern world of thinking, I've decided my opinion is the truth, it's my truth. That Cardinal-elect Radcliffe, in his initial interventions at the beginning, I think at the retreat of before the Synod, noted how some people will be disappointed. And I think from the perspective of what we've been hearing about the Synod from different sources, all the Synods really, it seems like it's all been about listening, but sometimes listening also means being told that, no, you're wrong. And I think that's what sometimes it feels like is missing, that we all need to know that we have to be converted and that not every idea we have is correct or right.
Right. Well, and part of it, I think I heard a delegate say the other day, just in passing at the coffee break, probably nobody will find that everything they wanted is going to be in that document. Right. Nobody's going to say, well, we won. And that's the point. Because the Christian life is not about winners and losers, and it's not about the competition as to who has the final word. That's not the way. We look to find what are the common, deeper sorts of the heartbeat, so to speak, of the faith, and how it deals with real concrete situations in the world, which are certain kinds of situations in my diocese would be different in other parts of the United States, but around the world, what's being lived in Africa, what's being lived in Oceania or in the Middle East. One of the things that I found most moving about these gatherings, and I think is very important in terms of what I take home, is my sense of having a real appreciation for what many parts of the world, the cost of being a faithful Catholic in vastly different circumstances, the witness, the fidelity, the charity that at great cost is being lived in these contexts, and we have to open our minds and our experience to kind of how the faith is being lived globally. Otherwise, we just kind of say, well, it has to be kind of the way we think it, and we have to let go of some things in terms of the bigger picture.
To that very point, with the global church gathered together and you're hearing testimonies from Catholics around the world, has there been a particular testimony that's really struck you in particular that you'll be taking back with you?
Well, I could say, for example, the testimony of some of the lay delegates, specifically from some of the very poor parts of the world, about the just the dedication to kind of just teaching the faith in the local community and trying to kind of live a Catholic family life in circumstances that are often quite hostile or indifferent. I think we in our sort of corner of the West tend to deal with indifference, but many parts of the world deal with hostility. And I think I just have heard so many from countries. I will say that the testimonies of those from the Middle East, which is so war torn, but also just how the Christian life is a constant sort of witness to the suffering Christ, and that's very real.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just appreciate, I want to take this opportunity to say appreciate your presence here and all the good work that you do as a bishop, and that you're just always focused so much, and it's not even correct to say left, right, or center, but you're just always focused on Jesus Christ and the life of Jesus Christ in the church. And, and I think more and more we're starting to see that synodality. I completely agree with you. I think it's a new word that's being attached to a very old concept about the communio of the life of the church, and especially the communion of bishops with each other,
Right.
united to Christ.
Right. I find it. I mean, what I ask people to do when they say, "Well, what can we do to promote synodality?" I say, "We all need to pray more." And when I say pray more, I mean we need to learn Lectio Divina. We need to kind of not let the scriptures, especially the Gospels, be something that we let roll around in our memories. And so I say, people read the Gospel of the day every day, and let it roll in your mind, because you have to have something else, something of the Word of Christ in your mind besides all these other words that get thrown at us, because that's the conversion that allows us to relate to each other differently and to relate to the life of Christ by the grace of the Holy Spirit. And we need to trust that. We just need to trust that we're guarded by the faith of Peter, and the church is dealing with some very new circumstances, and yet the issue of communion, of being together, and of the one faith and the one hope and the one love to which we are called to give witness, is always sort of has to be the lead thing we think about.
I'd be curious, you were here last October, obviously, been here all month. Can you give us a little insight into what these days are like and what that engagement with other delegates are like in the halls as well?
Well, it's a pretty heavy schedule, because we every community lives. I mean, from the different parts of the world, we all live in different parts of Rome, and so, but most of our delegates are together. So we would always start with a morning mass, and then a quick breakfast, and then you go and start you mostly you're in small groups, language groups, and so you get to meet people. I mean, from different parts of the world, and you just are. Like I said, I've been very touched by just the witness of people and sort of they're wanting to kind of to hear what's going on. Like I get questions like, "How's it in the United States? How do you deal with this issue?"
Right.
And so I mean, it's an intense, but it's a very human thing, even though it's a heavy schedule. It's a very human thing just to have. It's a grace to be able to spend some time just listening to how people are trying to witness to their faith and the things they would like to see happen. And I even people from just vastly different, and you kind of work with the languages at the coffee break, and people still communicate.
And just our final moment with you here, Bishop, are you expecting there to be a lot of contention on the vote on Saturday, or do you think by this point people have been walking together for quite a few years and everyone
Yeah,
will
no,
be on the same page?
it's very hard to predict,
Yeah.
how people would, but it's we've worked together a lot, and I think one of the things that might be interesting is to whatever is published this weekend, to compare it to the like last year, and you might be able to kind of mark some maturation in the discernment. We talk a lot about discernment, but I think we need to kind of put some flesh and blood to it, and basically it's giving God time to let things settle in your mind. You can't rush that, but I think you could see that there's. I think those will be. It's hard to predict, but I think the consensus of the communion that's been lived here, I think will be very evident.
Well, Bishop Flores, we are so grateful for your time and for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our coverage continues right after this break.